here as well, with markets hitting new highs today. When Gasparino left last hour, he was screaming at us to get a long-term chart of the NASDAQ, because we were talking about, 5,000 for the NASDAQ today, and back in before the bubble burst in 2000, and it took us a while in the control room to get a pen out and draw one, and that's what we came with today. That's pretty good drawing, actually. So that is quite the 20-year move back and forth, the crazy NASDAQ. It has crossed 5,000, and it did so back then, and it is back above it today, at least it was. Now, Glenn Hubbard joins us, former Bush economic advisor, on what really is driving these crazy markets, and he says it's a change in political tone. So, Glenn, what does that mean?
Well, I think markets, you realize that the U.S. is the soundest economy in the world among industrial nations, and with better policy, the U.S. economy could grow faster. Now, whether the markets are too optimistic about that better policy is another story.
Okay, so, boy, I always think it's interesting to have political conversations as they relate to markets, because, there's always going to be some sort of a bias, right? I mean, somebody's going to come in and project, it seems, their own political feelings and be like, hey, told you. But how do you think investors should look at this particular election now? I mean, it looks like Hillary Clinton's in the lead. Who knows what will actually happen? But should people be making decisions now, or is it better to wait a month or so?
Well, I think as the political dynamic unfolds, we'll see. But really, this economy is forcing politicians to have a referendum about, do we want to have faster growth,
right,
or do we want to be more backward-looking? That ultimately is what the voters will decide. The candidates aren't giving a lot of choices at this point, but hopefully that gets better.
Must be weird for a guy like you to observe it, though. It's not traditional in the way that you would expect a political campaign. Obviously, I mean, that's an understatement. But if I'm just talking about just purely economics, there's nobody's for free trade, it doesn't seem like.
That's right, but I think that after the election, there are abundant opportunities to compromise, to maybe get tax reform with also workers' support, better opportunities for trade, but also looking after workers who've been left behind. There should be room to move here. I think people position themselves in elections on one end or the other, but I think there's a real chance for compromise after the election, whichever of the candidates is elected.
From the point of view of financial markets, we used to say gridlock is good, and you would say back in the 90s that a Republican Congress and a Democratic President and Bill Clinton would be good for markets, and that was the theory. Does that theory, generally speaking, still apply? Because now we've reached a point where it's always gridlock. It's almost like nothing ever gets done, and maybe that positive, as it was seen, has turned into a negative, or no?
Well, I think the real gridlock that worries a lot of voters and ought to worry business people in the economy is the fact that Washington seems stuck. It's not a matter of Democrat versus Republican, but an inability to get anything done. I think people are upset about that. There are big things that need to happen. They could happen in divided government. They could happen in unified government. But I think voters and business people are saying, where is it?
But in the meantime, even though that hasn't happened yet, you still think American companies, like Amazon, which we highlighted today, we're showing Apple and Microsoft and some others, that successful American companies can still make more money and their stock prices can go up, regardless of the politics.
Absolutely. The question is, how broadly will that prosperity be shared in the economy? It is still true that a rising tide will more or less lift all boats, but we got to get the tide up.
Right. And the overseas news. Boy, it was almost like when the whole Brexit UK vote was going on, we were also worried about what the effect was going to be, and now we're having a conversation a few weeks later about the stock market at all-time highs. Is there a lesson, big picture lesson there, or is it just that U.S. markets are the place to be when there's concern overseas, or we just got way ahead of ourselves with concern about what was happening over there?
Well, I think there are legitimate concerns, principally about the European Union itself, more than the United Kingdom. And I think those concerns are still there. But what you're starting to see, and you saw this in Chancellor Osborne's remarks too, is competition starting to happen in policy. The idea that the UK might cut its corporate tax rate. I think there will be a healthy debate here. I don't think it's the end of Western civilization. I wouldn't have voted for Brexit, but it's not the end of the world.
Well, that's very good. We'll leave it on that note. Not the end of Western civilization. Put that as a banner headline at the bottom. Thank you, Glenn Hubbard. It was good to see you. And
my pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your views, as always.